Okay, welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into, well, a really fascinating and sometimes pretty contentious relationship, the dynamic between Elon Musk and Donald Trump.
It's definitely captured a lot of headlines, hasn't it? And the sources were looking at various articles, reports covering their interactions, business connections, politics, even this public feud. They give us a lot to unpack.
Absolutely. So think of this deep dive as your way to quickly get up to speed on what these sources are actually reporting about this whole connection. We're trying to pull out the key details. Yeah.
Sounds good. And it makes sense to start maybe at the beginning because this relationship, it really hasn't been static. Reports suggest there was definitely an initial connection back during the Trump administration.
Right. I think I remember seeing reports that Musk actually went to Trump's inauguration.
That's right. Sources mention he was there, and not just there, but apparently seated quite close to Trump. There are even reports saying he spoke at a rally linked to the inauguration afterwards.
So more than just showing up, was he involved in other ways early on?
It seems so. Early on, sources indicate Musk actually served on Trump's Economic Advisory Council.
Okay, so that suggests a certain level of, let's say, engagement or potential influence right from the beginning.
Exactly. But things clearly didn't stay that way. What do the sources point to as, like, a turning point?
Well, a key moment that pops up in several reports is Musk's criticism of an initiative, sometimes called the One Big Beautiful Bill Act.
Ah, okay. And what was the reported criticism about? What was the issue?
According to the sources, Musk apparently argued it disproportionately benefited the wealthy and could actually harm poorer populations. But maybe the real kicker for him, as described, was his view that it hit Tesla hard by getting rid of EV tax breaks.
Ah, okay, so a direct hit on one of his major business interests. How did Trump reportedly take that criticism?
Well, reports suggest the reaction was pretty strong. Sources mention threats were made to cut off government contracts, lucrative ones with Musk's companies, because of these policy disagreements. Right. And those government contracts, they're a pretty big part of Musk's whole business world, aren't they?
Oh, massively so. That comes through loud and clear in the sources. Companies like SpaceX, Starlink, the satellite internet thing, even Tesla, they apparently do a huge amount of business with the U.S. government.
So any threat to those contracts, as the sources describe it, would carry, well, serious financial weight.
Absolutely.
That link between his businesses and the government seems really central here. Let's maybe dive a bit deeper into the specific examples the reports give about these interactions and alleged benefits.
Yeah, there are several specific instances highlighted. One report, for instance, talks about the Commerce Department changing the terms for the BEAD program. That's the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, the big federal push for internet access.
And that change specifically allowed Starlink to apply? Is that what it said?
That's what the source states, yes. And what's interesting, according to this report, is that it happened even though expert staff reportedly warned against it. They felt Starlink might mean, well, worse service and higher costs than fiber for the rural areas the program was meant to help.
That's quite specific. What other kinds of government connections do the sources bring up?
Another area is the Defense Department budget. One report notes the White House calling for a pretty big jump, like 13% in DOD spending, and it positions SpaceX as likely being a top recipient of that new Pentagon money.
Okay, so potentially a lot of defense contract money flowing there. And I think I saw something about a Golden Dome missile shield project.
Correct. Sources suggest SpaceX has become a frontrunner for that specific project as well.
Okay, major defense work possibilities. Any other examples of sort of government consideration for his companies?
There's an interesting little detail mentioned about considering using Starlink for Wi-Fi at a U.S. Army parade.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the report specifies this was for a parade on President Trump's birthday, held at a National Parks Service site. It kind of shows the platform being looked at even for specific high-profile events.
And wasn't there something about the Social Security Administration using Twitter?
Yes, that gets highlighted too. A source points out that the SSA started using X for official communications and even told people they should subscribe to the SSA's X account for updates.
Okay, and why is that considered noteworthy in this context?
Well, the report notes that subscribing means you have to create an X account. And the concern raised is that the SSA serves a lot of elderly people, right? And they might find it harder to navigate or sign up for social media platforms, potentially cutting them off from official info.
So the picture the sources are painting is really one where Musk's business interests are, like, deeply woven into government programs and policy discussions.
That sums it up well. It just underscores how much government business his companies do and points to these specific instances where policy decisions or, considerations reportedly cross paths with his ventures.
Okay, so beyond just the business side, the sources also really get into Musk's political activities, which seem to have become increasingly significant, and his reported influence. He's described as a major player in political funding now.
Yeah, that's a really key point across these reports. Sources state Musk actually became Trump's largest individual donor from the 2024 election cycle. One source says over $250 million in total contributions. Another mentions $277 million, basically framing him as maybe America's biggest political donor overall.
Wow, that is just an enormous amount of money in politics.
It really is. And the sources try to trace where some of that money reportedly went. They specifically mention a big chunk, like $20 million, went to a PAC described as an unusual RBG pass.
Wait, RBG? As in Ruth Bader Ginsburg? That sounds odd.
It does, doesn't it? The sources note how unusual it was. Apparently, this pay-sci spent money trying to link Trump with Ginsburg's pro-abortion rights views, a move that, as you might expect, reportedly got criticism, even from Ginsburg's own family.
Huh. So, using serious money for some pretty targeted, maybe even counterintuitive messaging. Did the sources mention spending in specific races, too?
Yes. Reports detail Musk putting millions into supporting the Republican candidate, Brad Schimel, in a really key Wisconsin Supreme Court race.
Wisconsin. Always crucial.
Exactly. And sources highlight Schimel as a big Trump supporter who'd also previously joined that Texas lawsuit challenging the Affordable Care Act.
So, potentially influencing state courts that could impact major national policies like the ACA. What about actual involvement inside a potential administration? Any talk of that?
Sources do indicate Musk was tapped for potential roles, yeah. He was reportedly asked to co-lead this thing called the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, alongside Vivek Ramaswamy.
DOGE, like the meme. Okay, well, that's memorable. What was this group supposed to do, according to reports?
Reports say their job was basically to audit U.S. agencies and figure out how to make major cuts to government operations. One source even mentions that suggestions coming out of this included getting rid of all regulations.
All regulations, wow.
Yeah, and there are also reports suggesting Musk was likely going to get a West Wing office for this whole cost-cutting project.
That suggests a potentially very deep involvement in how the executive branch actually operates.
It certainly sounds like it, based on the sources. And his political alignment isn't just behind the scenes. Sources note him showing up at big conservative events like CPAC in 2025. Apparently, he got a chainsaw from Argentina's President Javier Milei there.
A chainsaw?
Yeah, as a symbol, for cutting public spending.
Okay. And this support isn't just limited to the U.S., is it?
No. The sources also detail his reported backing for right-wing parties in Europe, Germany's AfD, parties in the UK, Italy, Spain, too. They also mentioned some controversial comments he made about German remembrance culture, which apparently drew pretty sharp criticism from European leaders like the German and Polish prime ministers.
So the overall picture from these sources is Musk really stepping up as a major political and financial force, aligning with conservative and right-wing movements, not just here, but globally.
That seems to be the synthesis from the breadth of reports, yes.
Okay, now let's shift to something the sources really flag as concerning in this whole dynamic. Trump's reported threats and this wider worry about the potential weaponization of government power.
Right. Reports across the board describe a pattern here. There are multiple accounts cited of Trump allegedly threatening to use the power of the government against people he saw as political enemies.
And were these threats reportedly aimed specifically at Musk at some point?
Yes. Sources state Trump reportedly warned Musk directly that he could face very serious consequences if he decided to fund Democratic candidates.
Wow.
And he also reportedly doubled down on threats to cut Musk's government contracts, even framing it as like an easy way to save money.
That's incredibly direct, linking political donations to potential business punishment via government action.
Exactly. And the sources connect these alleged actions to those broader worries about the potential weaponization of federal agencies against perceived enemies. They suggest this whole situation illustrates the risk of using government authority to sway business decisions or maybe punish political dissent.
It definitely brings up big questions about, the impartial use of government power when personal or political conflicts get involved.
According to these sources, it absolutely does. They present these instances as sort of case studies fueling those concerns about government power being used for political or personal aims.
And this whole complicated back and forth, it hasn't exactly been quiet, has it? The sources describe it as a very public affair.
Oh, completely. It's undeniable. The relationship, especially the rocky parts and the feuding, it became a huge public spectacle, played out very visibly on social media, especially X, which Musk owns, and Trump's platform, Truth Social.
And how do the sources say the public reacted to all that?
Well, reports note a lot of the reaction came in the form of, memes and jokes online. It basically turned these fights into a sort of virtual battleground.
Right.
It really highlights how these high-profile feuds, political or celebrity, just get amplified and debated constantly in the digital world, becoming, daily chatter for a lot of people.
Okay, so we've traced the relationship, the business ties to government, Musk's political surge, the reported threats, the public drama. If we pull all this together from the sources, what's the big takeaway here? What does it all boil down to?
Well, the sources, taken together, they really paint this picture of a super complex relationship between two extremely powerful individuals. It seems driven by this mix of political and economic calculations, shifting from something like an alliance to, open conflict, seemingly triggered by those policy disagreements that hit Musk's business interests.
And what are the broader implications of this kind of dynamic playing out so publicly, according to the reports?
The sources suggest it really shines a light on the potentially transactional nature of these alliances between big business figures and political leaders. It definitely underscores how massive personal wealth might influence politics and policy. And crucially, it raises these serious concerns, as reported, about government power possibly being used against business interests or people seen as political opponents.
And for you listening, this isn't just some abstract thing about two famous guys, is it?
Not at all. This dynamic really touches on fundamental questions about how much influence big business has on government, the often volatile role social media plays in politics now, and these reported worries about government accountability and whether power is being applied fairly. It's about understanding forces that could be shaping things around us.
Definitely gives you a lot to think about, that intersection of money, power, and politics. So when you look back at everything the sources lay out that reported shift in the relationship, the deep government connections detailed, Musk's huge step up in political influence and funding, and those concerns about Trump's alleged threats, it really shows just how tangled this whole thing is.
It really does. It makes you wonder what this evolving relationship between these kinds of powerful individuals, their huge business empires, and government power tells us about where politics and influence are heading, especially now in the digital age. What does it really mean when personal spats and political feuds blasted out on social media can recordedly have such immediate, potentially massive consequences for actual policy and business? That's definitely something worth mulling over.